You're probably wrong about Disney's lightsaber duels in Star Wars. And you're probably wrong about the lightsaber duels in Lucasfilm Star Wars too. There's a secret ingredient that all of the best Star Wars duels have in common. It's not fast choreography, it's not anything vague like atmosphere, direction, or story. It's something very specific and very invisible. Now, you've heard other YouTubers complain about Disney Star Wars for a lot of wacky and dubious reasons, but today I'm going to show you the real differences between the two eras of Star Wars combat. And it comes down to two words: damage communication. The invisible tricks that filmmakers use to keep us connected with the struggles and efforts of the fighters. It's how we keep a pulse on the fight. It builds tension, it keeps our minds active, and it exposits critical character information to us. It's not present in every Lucasfilm fight, and it's not absent in every Disney fight. And by comparing the eras, we can observe that damage communication is more than just the secret ingredient. It's the very foundation on which all other elements of the scene are built around. More importantly, we'll learn how to recognize it and why we feel its absence. So, what are the invisible magic tricks that Disney can't seem to replicate? And what's stopping them? How did Lucasfilm avoid the same pitfalls? And the question on everyone's mind right now, what did they do so differently that made the Acolyte's fights so damn good? I'll give you a hint. Whatever you think, you're probably wrong. Before we start, I'd like to know what your favorite lightsaber fight is and why, and what your least favorite lightsaber fight is and why. We'd love to hear about it in the comments. Let's cut to the chase. The problem with lightsaber fights is the lightsaber itself. Now don't shoot first, hear me out, because I'm right. When we talk about communicating damage, what we mean is that every fight scene ever has an invisible health bar for each character involved. As they take hits, their health bar decreases, and we as an audience understand the impact of that hit and how it has potentially shifted the outcome of the fight. Likewise, if they take a hit and the health bar doesn't decrease, that communicates critical information to us about both the efforts of the attacker and the strength or state of the defender. To this end, a lightsaber is a terrible weapon. The very rules of the lightsaber mean that a single direct hit must necessarily be disarming, a one-hit instant kill, and I doubt many people can fully empathize with the impact or pain of suddenly having a limb fly across the room because of a magic knife. In most cases, the second the lightsaber touches a character, that fight is decided. But we have 6 movies and some official animated lightsaber fights that are simply incredible to watch despite this critical design flaw in the saber's function. So, how did they do it? By communicating damage using everything except the blade itself. Take Luke and Vader's first fight, for example. Vader physically shoving Luke to the ground is a demonstration of him having the upper hand. Luke falling down the stairs, grunting in pain, communicates a small amount of damage taken. We might not have all fallen down the stairs ourselves, but we've definitely taken an unexpected fall. We know what that feels like, and Luke's grunts let us know that he felt it too. When it's time to show that maybe Luke has a shot, he gets 2 hits on Vader. Blowing this exhaust in his face is actually a weaker moment in my opinion, because we don't really know why that hurt Vader. Is it cold? Is it hot? Was it just a little annoying? Who knows? But he grunts and stumbles back to at least communicate to us that damage has been taken. The second hit is a good old-fashioned kick in the chest, and with a loud grunt, Vader is knocked down for the first time ever on screen. More than just the literal progress of the fight, these strikes and the communication of the invisible health bars are telling the audience, hey, Vader's good, but Luke can hit him, and if he can do that, well then, maybe he can win. We subconsciously play along with these prompts in our mind, engaging with the question of the scene. Can Luke win? How will Luke win? Vader knocked him down pretty good too though, so what can Vader do to knock him down for good? Ultimately, Vader throws a bunch of heavy objects at Luke, who reels in pain with each strike. His movement clearly slows, his reflexes are failing him, and when the saber combat resumes, he's now bloody and bruised and very clearly on the back foot. His health bar is low, and we understand that he's in trouble. We know that the lightsaber strike is final, and we know that in the beginning of the fight, Luke was blocking and striking well. But as the health bar decreases, his vulnerability increases. The physical damage we can empathize with isn't a trick to distract from the sabers, it's enhancing their tension. Vader still took some damage, and Luke fights on even when Vader tries to end the match. Maybe if Luke can land the right saber strike, despite all of the damage, despite his health bar, maybe he can bring Vader down. In a masterful communication of damage, Luke lands a very rare, non-disarming lightsaber strike, and we see and hear Vader recoil from this critical hit. His health bar drops, the gloves come off, and Vader retaliates ferociously. The fight is over with a single strike, as it was always going to be. But between the first clash and the final swing, we've been feasting on the densely packed substance of their battle. We know Vader can be hurt, and we know that Luke can hurt him. We know that Vader is strong enough to beat Luke to blood and bruises with his mind, but Luke can lash out and do serious damage. We're made to debate in our mind as we watch for the first time who is going to win and how. The swordsmanship is flashy and exciting to watch, but it's how our swordsmen create the conditions to land that definitive strike which really makes the fight. The moments of physical damage communication act as both padding and character exposition. This is the choreographic and directorial magic trick that carries most saber fights throughout the original 6 films, though sometimes done better than others. Although their next fight is fought mostly with words, we're still given Luke kicking Vader down the stairs, Vader collapsing Luke's high ground, and in an example of poor damage communication, we get the famous Vader tripping over for no reason. I think the climax could have benefited from Luke landing a physical blow to knock him over, perhaps jabbing his leg the way he had jabbed his arm in the previous movie. Without that on-screen cue, it looks kinda silly the way he just falls over. It's an arbitrary win condition, and remember that phrase, it's gonna come up later. Pay attention to most saber fights and you'll start to see the intentional moments of communicated damage across the whole series. Maul kicks Qui-Gon in the kidneys, kicks Obi-Wan in the face twice. Qui-Gon gets Maul back with an elbow to the kidneys and a backhand to the face just to get kicked in the head again. And of course, Maul wins by bashing a metal pipe into Qui-Gon's forehead. This is what makes Maul the real deal. Dishing out damage we can understand. The spinny tricks are impressive and imply a threat, but the physical blows he gives and receives demonstrates the threat. We can't learn how tough he is by how many saber hits he lands because it only takes one hit per enemy to instantly win the fight. So the physical damage communication is how we learn in real time that Maul is skilled and dangerous. Anakin and Obi-Wan begin their duel at a lightning pace with impressive spins, but you feel the damage when Anakin chokes Obi-Wan with his robotic hand, as old Ben gasps and groans and struggles. He lands a kick in the ass, then cops a drop kick so hard it disarms him, before retaliating with a kick that slams Anakin's back and head against a solid metal table. Be honest, when you watch this fight, you probably never think, "Ooh, I bet their arms and wrists are really sore from all that movement," but you have thought, "Ow, that must have hurt so bad when he got hit like that." And that's the point. That's you reading the invisible health bars and registering these moments as damaging and putting the characters at a greater risk of that fatal saber strike. That's you learning about what the character is able and willing to give and receive. As we get to the end, that lightning pace has vanished. They're much slower, they're out of breath, their clothes burned and torn, and their faces filthy and sweating. We're being told by the scene that they're hurting, they're at their absolute limit, and they can't keep going on like this forever. With a little ego bait, the saber finally lands a strike on Vader that simply couldn't have landed in the beginning of the fight. I mean, just look. The fight begins with Vader making almost an identical jump towards Obi-Wan, backwards. But a much slower, lower health bar Vader is far more vulnerable. The tension of this battle is wondering how Vader ends up in the suit and how Obi-Wan gets away, but the substance of this battle is seeing what it takes and how much it takes to arrive at those answers. Every kick, punch, slam, and impact communicates to us that the battle is progressing, and it does so in a language so innate that we don't even have to think about it. They weaponize everything except for the blade in order to bring their opponent to the blade, because it's the pain and struggle, not the mastery of magical swords, that we connect with. all of the best duels you've seen, from Empire all the way to the Old Republic animated fights, utilize these moments of relatable physicality to communicate the progress of the fight, the character of the fighters, and so much more. It's seeing what it takes to arrive at the fateful lightsaber strike. It's seeing the characters work for it, and seeing what working for it means to those characters. The key to all of these duels as a viewing experience is that our mind is active as it studies the scene, automatically engaging with the combat by interpreting the visual language being spoken directly to our eyes. These fights circumvent the lightsaber's narrative weakness as a one-hit weapon by putting the focus on, and communicating clearly, the physical damage that these characters inflict on one another. It turns every match from a one-hit KO to an intense, drawn-out competition. It's how people can enjoy them in a complete vacuum with no concept of the story or stakes. And it's the invisible magic trick that Star Wars relies on for captivating lightsaber combat. Now, it would be easy to say, anyway, Disney doesn't do that, so that's why it's different. Like and subscribe and hype the video up and buy one of our really cool stickers, link in the description. But I think it's actually far more interesting to talk about why they don't do that. It wasn't an accident. It's not a lost art, and people didn't just forget. No, the problem with Disney's combat is philosophy and fandom. What's interesting about the Disney era's lackluster combat is actually that it's not Disney's fault. Blaming Disney, while fun, is the cop-out answer, and it's just an easy way to get clicks without having to think too hard. Luckily for you and the 7 other people watching, we don't go for clicks around these parts. The problem with the lightsaber combat now isn't the lightsaber, it's the myth of the lightsaber. With adult fans running the show who likely grew up with 30 years of lightsaber toy advertisements, the lightsaber is more than an elegant tool to be dropped down a bottomless pit or snapped in half. The lightsaber is legacy. It's pure magic. It's beautiful. It's available at your nearest retailer for affordable prices. And it's so cool because it's so powerful. The Force Awakens immediately shows us this worship of the lightsaber, and how it causes a shift in priority for the direction of saber combat. The priority of the climactic fight is to show how cool and dangerous the lightsaber is, and so 100% of the damage has to be communicated through the blade. It becomes the main character of the scene. Finn is knocked down into the snow by the impact of one blade against another. Did that hurt or just trip him? Was it because of the bad stance, or did Kylo just hit his stick really hard? I don't know, neither do you, but it lets us see the cool particle effects flying out of the blades when they clash. Wow, you really wouldn't want to get touched by one of those. They look really dangerous and cool. Anyway, Finn gets touched by one of those, and I actually like this for damage communication because the slow burn sensation is something we can reasonably empathize with, and Finn's reaction sells it for me. But it's a little undermined by how unbothered he seems swinging that arm around seconds later. Though this saber fight is a misdirect, it does establish the sequel combat formula. Finn cuts Kylo short a little, and we don't really know if that even hurt or just surprised him. Kylo swings his saber hard enough this time that Finn drops his. We do get a physical hit, but before we can engage with the moment, Kylo cuts Finn's jacket so hard it knocks him out. The fight is over. The damage has been communicated so poorly that it's unclear what damage any of the hits, including the finisher, even did. Sometimes lightsabers clash and it's fine. Sometimes they clash and you fall over. Sometimes they cut your clothes with the tip and you flinch. Sometimes they cut your clothes with the tip and you are defeated. It's an arbitrary win condition, and it's boring. Yes, there are explanations that we can logically infer after the fact, but giving your audience mental homework to understand the outcome isn't really what the average viewer wants from a lightsaber fight. Now, let's see this format played out in full in Rey and Kylo's duel. Wow, look at how easily and accidentally the lightsaber cut that tree down. Very cool, very dangerous. I wouldn't want to be hit by one of those. Bam! Look at the particles exploding out when the sabers collide. Oops, cut down another tree accidentally because that's just how dangerous these mythical and ancient swords are. Look at the sparks coming off those rocks as the sabers hit them. Very cool, very otherworldly, very dangerous. Bam, another tree cut down. How cool, how dangerous. This is intense because those swords are very sharp. Kylo hits Rey's lightsaber a bit harder than he did before, I guess, to cause some stumbling. Watch out, Rey. Just like with Finn, the priority is showing off how dangerous the lightsaber is, because the lightsaber is the star of the scene. Show off those new particle effects. Let's hear those sabers hiss and spit. And make sure you don't touch one. The turning point of this fight is literally just a long, drawn-out threat of being touched by one. Then Rey decides to win by simply hitting harder to drop Kylo's guard and cut his skirt. There's an argument to be made that damage is being communicated here, but everything from the slow-motion stumble, the rising music, and the hero camera angles tell us that this fight is already over. Finn got touched by the lightsaber first, he lost. Kylo got touched by the lightsaber first, he lost. Because the lightsaber is the star of the scene, absolutely nothing can happen until a strike lands, which is final, and so tension is not being built the way it was before. Instead, they seem to be relying on the hype and danger of the saber to build tension, and so repeated saber clashes are all we get until the arbitrary win condition. All Rey had to do was hit the sticks together harder. All Kylo had to do was hit the sticks together harder. Want a stumble? Clash the blades. Want to disarm? Clash the blades. This is why people regard these fights as just swinging baseball bats. It's a failure to communicate how the fight is going, and so it feels like it's going nowhere until it suddenly ends. The only exciting moment we get is the final moment. Without the physical damage to demonstrate the threat, all we get are the tricks which imply the threat. It's completely without personality or character. It's empty. Without the damage communication, we get no character communicated either. The only difference between Rey and Finn's combat is basically that Rey just hits harder. You could invert their roles and nothing would change. But if you swapped them for someone like Maul, then you would imagine a much more physically aggressive fight, because that's what the damage communication of his duel has taught us about him. Swap Kylo with Dooku and you might imagine he would go for disabling jabs and force knockouts against Maul, because we learned that about him from the damage communication in the prequels. Now imagine that it was Rey versus Finn, and notice that you don't really know how they would fight each other, because you haven't really learned anything about them from the fighting you've seen them do. What we see in The Force Awakens is a format which plagues most of the lightsaber combat in the Disney era. We don't have time to go one by one through all the fights, but I encourage you to take what we've discussed here and see how it applies to every other fight. The fight on Kijimi features the same sort of shots, emphasizing the saber and its danger as they clash sticks. In the Death Star fight, the worst thing that happens is Rey falls over when Kylo hits the stick a bit harder than he did before. In the shows, we see fights which, regardless of its quite good choreography or quite atrocious framing and camera work, fall victim to this mythologizing of the saber and the lack of physical damage communication. I blame this myth of the lightsaber because it's honestly the truest thing about every Star Wars fan. Search your feelings, you know it to be true. If you've ever had a pretend lightsaber fight, you imagine the cool spinning moves or the sounds of the blades clashing, not kicking your opponent or backhanding them. The lightsabers are what make the memorable aesthetic of a good duel, but the substance of these sequences has always been the very human and very physical combat in between saber ignition and final strike. That's the part we directly engage with. The mythologizing of the lightsaber as this magical tool, both in the literal and sometimes narrative sense, is so prevalent in Star Wars fandom that people got mad over Anakin's saber being chopped, or Luke throwing Anakin's saber away. In these officially licensed, fan-made Star Wars stories, we see that myth informing the writing and choreography in real time. It's fascinating, and it's frustrating. The lightsaber is special. It can't take a backseat in fights. It's the main attraction. My heart agrees with this sentiment entirely, but my brain knows that lightsabers are terrible for damage communication. It's their fatal flaw, and for as long as the creative teams prioritize the saber, damage communication will suffer and will continue to get stick-bashing contests with seemingly arbitrary ends and no character to speak of. As grim as that sounds, I'm going to pivot to a positive and admit to something I believe that will sound so outlandish that I'm genuinely embarrassed to say it out loud. You think it's that the Acolyte fights are good? No, I'm not embarrassed that the Acolyte is a good watch. You think I'm going to say A New Hope's duel is boring or bad? No, but we will get to that. What I have to say is much more embarrassing to say out loud, and the only reason I would dare put this on the internet is because I know that it's objectively true. You're gonna have to hear me out for a moment as I drop this bombshell the only way I know how. Somehow, the Kenobi show has the best damage communication. So let's talk about Old Ben's first on-screen duel and his last. One was created before the myth of the lightsaber, yet isn't remembered as one of the greats as far as its choreography is concerned. And the other is a climax of a show which I think is the epitome of mythologizing Star Wars in ways which completely undermine it, yet somehow delivers some of the best damage communication since Disney's takeover. These opposite ends of our Star Wars timeline demonstrate the lessons learned and forgotten in the construction of a lightsaber duel, and how the context of their creation has trapped them. Old Ben vs. Vader is generally given a pass in the broader strokes of the community just for being the first. Of course it's slow and silly, they hadn't cracked the formula yet, is the general sentiment. Being the first does play a part in this, but what we actually see on screen is all the makings of the Disney lightsaber duels. Establish the danger. Look how the blades hiss and spit, they spark on impact, they cut through the scenery. The fight is fought entirely by clashing blades and the occasional spin trick to imply an agile threat. Absolutely no damage is taken until the final hit, an instant win. It's a Disney sequels fight from start to finish. However, this focus on establishing the danger of the saber hits a little differently in 1977 when no one has ever seen this before. There's a viewing context to A New Hope that cultural osmosis has simply taken from us. Everyone knows who Luke's dad is. Everyone knows what a lightsaber is. We can't go back, and that means that 100% of the tension that this demonstration of the lightsaber would have built is completely missing. We can understand that this once did make a major impact on audiences, and that's why we respect it, but it can never have that impact again. Using the lightsaber itself as the vehicle for substance and tension only worked once, and I'd even say the choreography of Empire's fight is an acknowledgement of this. I think Disney duels come under more scrutiny precisely because they're trying in vain to recreate that first impact feeling, cycling through the aesthetics of every kind of lightsaber combat in a sort of identity crisis, but always at its core, unable to move away from the lightsaber as the mythical main character of the scene. A genuinely outstanding example of successfully recapturing that impact comes from Fix It in Post's Scene 38 Reimagined. Link in the description, watch it if you haven't. This is a demand. This alternate look at Ben and Vader implements all of the lessons learned in lightsaber combat. In particular, we see excellent damage communication, physical hits, audible reactions. We get a sense of how the fight is going, and they even do more to make the final strike feel less arbitrary. This project doesn't imitate the original on paper at all. It doesn't offer a replacement for the original, but it does completely recreate the impact that the original scene left on audiences. The thrill of this fight that you feel watching this, the way it captures your imagination entirely, this is what audiences in 1977 felt with the original. It understands that we don't go backwards to find these moments of thrill and impact, we go forwards, using everything we've learned to create new ones. So that's what Kenobi did, right? Wrong. The mythologizing in this show from start to finish leads me to believe that the best part of it, the damage communication in the finale, wasn't informed by restraint. It was informed by constraint. I think the reason that this show is so fan-film but delivers excellent damage communication is because they were forced to. Because the circumstances of the battle are so uniquely limiting. Not only can neither of them die, they can't sustain new injuries. We know that Old Ben is fine, and we know that Vader literally doesn't have any limbs left to lose. Their duel cannot end in any way that changes the status quo. It cannot end how a saber fight traditionally does. So after a very Disney-like duel of stick bashing with a heavy coat of prequel aesthetics, Obi-Wan is risen on the third day and we're treated to a saber fight that simply can't be decided with a saber strike. This force push is the first good move. I actually love Vader audibly panicking. I love him not sticking the landing, and I love that just like the original trilogy and the prequel fights, it's communicating damage and expositing about the characters. Big Bad Vader, who we mythologize especially in the Disney era, is still the apprentice. Obi-Wan is the master, and he is unfortunately now doing a very Space Jesus fanfic moment that I don't love. The rocks pelting Vader rely solely on his grunts to sell the damage being dealt, and it falls flat of good damage communication. It would have been at least nice to see the armor get a dent, some scratched paint, or even a rock to hit his respirator and inform Obi-Wan's decision to go for that later. But then we get to the really good stuff. Bashing the respirator in is a brutal move which stuns Vader completely with every hit. Bashing a metal object into his chest over and over again is a hit we can feel, and Vader audibly wheezing and grunting sells the idea that he is hurting, he is suffocating, he is losing. Like, I don't know, maybe I'm just a huge nerd, but hearing is what really got to me emotionally. This is the most hurt he has ever been on screen inside that suit. He can barely stand. A boulder knocks him over with a thud and a grunt. He lunges so weakly at Obi-Wan that he's easily dodged and knocked to the dirt by the kind of vague Disney back scratch that we saw with Finn. The fight isn't perfect at all, but being forced to end it without a fatal or majorly wounding saber strike means we get to watch Obi-Wan bring Vader's health bar down piece by piece. Though a personal nitpick of mine is that the mask being cut doesn't really convey any level of injury or damage. I think I would have preferred a rock hit the respirator to put Vader off enough that Obi-Wan could hit him with the boulder, do the back scratch to the ground, then have Obi-Wan cut the mask in the same move that rotates his hilt so he can bash it into the respirator repeatedly, keeping the camera low with Obi watching Vader's chest get caved in, and only moving up to reveal the face to both Obi and the audience when Vader stumbles and falls backwards out of Obi's reach to end the fight. Yes, Disney makes it very clear who won the fight quite early, just as they did with Rey and Kylo, but this time we get to see Obi-Wan work for that win, and what it means for him to work for it. The choice to attack Vader's weakness, a weakness he gave him, is a major turning point. The guilt and fear disappear for a moment, and we see that the young Obi-Wan who exploited Anakin's weakness on Mustafar is still alive in Ben, who exploits Vader's physical weakness in the same way. The communicated damage doesn't build tension, but it builds emotion, drama, and character. I don't just weep because they play Vader's wheezing sound, I weep because the damage makes me feel sorry for him. It turns Vader back into a scared child, it reduces him from Dark Lord to a barely alive slave. It makes him a victim of Obi-Wan for the second time in his life. And knowing that Obi-Wan is okay with opening those wounds and tightening that noose around Anakin's neck is its own level of tragic character exposition which pays off his mini-arc. In the conclusion to this largely unremarkable show, the combat is expositing information about the characters. The damage communication is speaking to our subconscious just as it had in every classic and fan-favorite duel. The constraints on the creative team seem to have forced them to produce the first Disney duel I actively rewatch, and which manages to generate an emotional reaction from me for something more substantive than just nostalgia. The nostalgia is cashed in with the unmasking, but leading up to that, we get this incredible wealth of character being exposited silently by the damage communication. Admittedly, this was a bit of a tangent, but I wanted to Trojan horse this section of the video in because I think it's fascinating to see how the context of the creation of both the first and last Obi-Wan fights shaped them in completely different ways. The original fight was constructed for an effect that the cultural relevance of Star Wars has taken from it, and the Kenobi show's fight was specifically forced by the cultural significance of the Star Wars timeline to produce Disney's first good lightsaber duel. It's interesting to see how Lucasfilm immediately learned from the first duel and improved it by focusing more on damage communication over the mythologizing of the lightsaber, and how the Disney era seemingly had to be forced by circumstances to move on from lightsaber nostalgia. It's like poetry or whatever. Unfortunately though, the spell wasn't broken. Ahsoka delivers some increased physicality to some fights, but is still just the same old stick-clashing formula with almost every fight ending arbitrarily. We still can't get away from lightsabers as the main characters of these scenes. That is, of course, until the Acolyte. The Acolyte's combat gets it, and nobody disagrees. No matter what anyone thinks of the show as a whole, we all know that the saber combat in the second and third act is leagues ahead of anything Disney has produced so far. Now, just as people attempted to say the problem with the sequel combat was it was slow, some people attribute this to the Acolyte's speed. What I hope you'll notice going forward is that the true secret of the Acolyte's fights is the return of physical damage communication to offset the lightsaber's one-hit problem. While the speed of these fights is impressive and very aesthetically similar to the prequels, a closer inspection will reveal the lengths the Acolyte goes to in order to communicate the invisible health bars the way that Lucasfilm Star Wars had. Every fast swing, spinning trick, and display of saber damage is punctuated with a kick to the ribcage that sends you flying backwards, a kick to the shin, a kick to the chest, punching and grappling and throwing to the ground. We're seeing the fighters work for their win condition by bashing the enemy in the face with your metal saber or utilizing ancient deep lore metal to disable the blade entirely in a level of disrespect to the lightsaber that I simply cannot imagine J.J. Abrams' sequels doing. Kamia's armor is perfectly designed to fix the lightsaber's damage communication problem, and itself is used to build on the substance of the fight as other characters realize the mechanics and attempt to use it against him. We see these characters think on their feet and take every chance they can get for an advantage and block their opponent at every opportunity. Smacking the sticks together isn't good enough. They need to hurt each other and wear each other down to score that winning blow. And that means we get to watch their health bars decrease with every hit, just like we did with Luke and Vader on Bespin. Sol doesn't just decide to win. He rushes Kamir unarmed, and Kamir arrogantly accepts this challenge after killing another Jedi unarmed, only to realize that Sol significantly outclasses him in hand-to-hand combat. Kamir has the breath beaten out of his lungs and is powerless to stop Sol's final strike. Osha's interference may spare him, but he lost the battle because Sol beat his health bar to near zero. And there's no ambiguity about that, and it was thrilling to watch. This fight implied Kamir's threat with fancy saber tricks, it demonstrated his threat with physical damage communication, and it did the exact same for Sol. Jeki doesn't lose because Kamir suddenly hit her stick harder or arbitrarily landed a hit. He pulled out a dirty surprise attack that Jeki wasn't prepared for amidst her ferocious strikes. A move so beneath the Jedi, but not beneath Kamir. In the rematch, it's clear that Sol outclasses Kamir, and that's communicated through the hits he lands and the hits Kamir fails to land on him. We're learning about the characters, their capabilities and limitations, what they're willing to do, and we're doing it entirely through good damage communication. Where we struggle to imagine how Rey and Finn would match up against established characters, we have a surplus of character information to help us imagine how Kamir might fight Maul or pre-suit Vader. Sol versus Dooku? Well, my money's on Sol personally. Our minds are active during these fights. We're feasting on valuable information. This is the substance that Disney Combat has been missing. This is what made the very best prequel, original trilogy, and official animated saber duels. While the Acolyte has the aesthetic of a fan project with all of its deep lore and prequel speed saber combat, it hardly feels like a fan film the way that the Disney era tends to. It's free of the mythologizing of the lightsaber. To the creative team behind the show, just as with George Lucas himself, the lightsaber is just a tool. For the first time in 19 years, someone made an official live-action Star Wars duel that purposely addresses the problem with lightsabers in combat. We build tension from physical communicated damage, we follow the fight and understand the characters through the way they circumvent the stick bashing to get their shots in. It's such a perfect return to form that I'm genuinely worried that blind Acolyte hate pushed by grifters who don't believe their own message will cause Disney to revert back to the playbook in all regards. What a screaming shame it would be if that's what awaits us in Ahsoka Season 2. The Acolyte understood the secret ingredient to the best lightsaber combat, and it executed it to extraordinary lengths. Above all else, I think that should be very loudly celebrated, because the Acolyte's setting and ballooning budget put it on the chopping block for Disney. Without a potential crossover movie lifeline, it needed to outperform its contemporaries just to justify its existence. On viewership data, it didn't. On incredible lightsaber combat, it put nearly the last 2 decades of choreography to shame. I wanted to talk about damage communication because despite its importance, it's invisible. You can compare duels for hours and never once bring it up because it's so intentionally hidden deep beneath the surface. It's a masterclass in action, but it's now undermining the direction of Star Wars itself. You were probably wrong about lightsabers because the strength of the best duels is their ability to hide the lightsaber's boring one-hit mechanic from us. You were probably wrong about lightsabers because you were probably tricked. And that's a good thing. The difference between good and bad lightsaber duels has never been Disney or Lucasfilm. It's never been about faster or slower, swelling scores or tense silences, or even narrative stakes. These all contribute to the aesthetic and experience of the scene, but if our attempts to make a good duel come down to just mimicking or criticizing the aesthetics in a futile effort to recapture an experience, we're missing out entirely on the substance and intent at the very core of the scene. Good damage communication is the one constant you can find in all of the most memorable duels that Star Wars has ever had, and I encourage you to keep an eye out for it in your favorite fights and notice its absence in the more lackluster ones. I want you to be more conscious of the way we learn about each fighter when they're allowed to do more than just smack a stick. I want that to be a major talking point in the broader discourse on lightsaber combat. The successful invisible blending of physical damage and lightsaber swinging is what makes saber combat so legendary and memorable. But that legend ironically blinds us to what the real substance of saber combat is, because that hype, that thrill, that substance isn't found in the myth of the lightsaber, it's found in rejecting it. When we insist on glorifying the lightsaber as the star of the show, we get stick-bashing contests. When the lightsaber becomes merely a tool, we get interesting, dynamic, character-led combat which exposits character and personality to the audience. Rather than just another 20 years of cycling through fan-favorite lightsaber combat aesthetics, trying desperately to recapture a feeling which can only be achieved by divorcing lightsaber combat from the hype and mythology which follows it. I hope that the Star Wars creative teams and fans alike can see through the myth and nostalgia. I want to see the conversation and criticism move away from broad terms like direction and atmosphere and into the specifics. I want to see damage communication talked about in discussions of combat choreography as the defining feature of a good duel. I want studios to see us demand not a hollow imitation of our nostalgic experiences, but a brand new experience built on the same foundational tricks which forged the originals. The point of the magic trick is to go unnoticed. But if we allow it to be completely missed in our analysis and forgotten in our discourse, then we deny ourselves the ability to reproduce that magic. And that's a real shame. Thank you everybody for watching until the end. At the start, I asked you what your favorite and least favorite duels were. We would love to hear about them, and we'd love to see you reflecting on the role of damage communication in those duels. For a look behind the scenes of this video, you can head over to our Patreon, or if you'd like to support us without a subscription, you can check out our first ever run of Idol Scree stickers. I cannot stress enough how good they look in person. If you'd like to support us for free, go ahead and subscribe, leave a comment, and share the video around. Special thanks to all of the live premiere viewers. You guys really make this an experience for us that we cherish. We've got a lot more to say about Star Wars, so if you want to see those videos made, let us know. Until next time, I'll see you later.